I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was Thursday morning, and the cafe smelled like rain on asphalt, with a hint of roasted beans and damp wool. I was the kind of customer who lingered, tapping at my phone without sending any of the half-typed messages, folding the paper napkin over itself more times than necessary. She was there already, sitting at the corner table by the window, flipping through a notebook. Her hair caught the light in strands of silver and honey, and she wore that muted green sweater that made her look older, but still unmistakably her. "Hey," she said, almost in passing, and for a moment I thought she was talking to the barista. Then I realized she was looking at me. "The usual?" I nodded, surprised. She remembered my order: black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. I hadn't even known she knew I came here every morning. I shuffled over, careful not to spill the cup I hadn't ordered yet. "Yeah, thanks," I mumbled, and my voice sounded smaller than I felt. She smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile that demanded anything, just the quiet acknowledgement that I existed, right here in this too-loud cafe. She folded her notebook, flicked her eyes toward her hands, and then back up at me, as if she was checking if I was paying attention. I felt like I was, but not sure why it mattered. I sat down across from her, and there was that pause, the one that stretches just enough for small observations to feel heavy. My shoes scuffed the floor. My hands kept fidgeting with the strap of my backpack. She stirred her coffee slowly, tilting the cup, eyes never leaving mine. "You look tired," she said finally. I shrugged. "Just school stuff." The words felt clumsy. I wanted to explain more, but the honesty stuck in my throat like wet leaves. She nodded, as if she understood everything I didn't say. That's when I noticed the tiny details. The way she rubbed her thumb over the edge of the notebook, the small scar on her wrist, the quiet way her shoulder lifted when she exhaled. She didn't have to speak to fill the silence, but somehow she did. A bird hitched along the window ledge outside. I watched it for longer than necessary. When I looked back, she was smiling faintly at the way I'd paused, like she'd been expecting it. "Your friend's still asleep?" I asked, trying for casual. She laughed softly, a sound that didn't belong in a cafe. "Yeah, he's hopeless in the mornings. Always was." And that was it. A shared joke. Nothing more, yet enough to make the corners of my chest ache. I kept stealing glances at her throughout the next 10 minutes, noticing how she crossed and uncrossed her legs, how the sunlight made patterns across the table, how her fingers lingered on the pen for a second too long. I'd paused thoughts mid-sentence countless times today, but I didn't care. Not now. The bell over the door chimed. Someone left. Someone came in. My phone vibrated, a half-cent text blinking in the notification bar. But before I could reach for it, she leaned slightly closer, voice almost conspiratorial. "I've got something to tell you. Something you'll never forget." Her eyes were steady, unreadable, but insistent. And just like that, the ordinary morning, the ordinary cafe, felt like the start of something that might change everything or nothing at all. I swallowed, hands still fidgeting, and waited. I didn't sleep much that night. The words she'd whispered echoed in my head, looping over and over. Something you'll never forget. What could it be? And why did the sound of her voice feel heavier than any secret should? The next morning, I found her on the fire escape outside her apartment, watering her plants. She had her sleeves rolled up, and the sunlight caught the faint wrinkles at her eyes. I lingered at the doorway, pretending to adjust my backpack. "You're early," she said without looking up. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, and my voice was quieter than I intended. She nodded, and for a moment we just stood there, the water dripping onto the metal grate, the smell of wet soil mingling with morning air. Then she said, almost offhandedly, "I wasn't always this quiet." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Her laugh was soft, almost embarrassed. "No, I used to travel a lot, used to be loud, careless. Life changed that, I guess." She tilted her head toward me, studying my expression. "Do you ever feel like that? Like you're just adjusting to things you didn't choose?" I felt a little sting in my chest. I thought about the messages I never sent, the quiet apartment I came home to, the loneliness that made ordinary routines feel heavier. "Yeah," I said. "Sometimes." She handed me a mug of tea, and our fingers brushed for a second. Small, accidental, but the kind of touch that leaves heat behind. I looked away, focusing on the steam curling up between us. You know, she continued, your friend talks about you a lot. Not that you'd know it, because you're you. She smiled faintly, and I felt the pull of something I wasn't ready to name. I stirred my tea, eyes darting to her hands again. The way her thumb grazed the rim of the cup, the slight tremor when she lifted it. My mind ran through impossible scenarios. What if this feeling, whatever it was, wasn't just curiosity? What if it was more, the kind of thing that would make every interaction awkward, risky? After all, she was my friend's mom, divorced, independent. The barriers were obvious, and yet, I felt the quiet ache of wanting to know her better, to linger in the safe edges of her presence, without crossing the line that reality drew so clearly. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence. Sometimes, I like it when mornings are empty. Just me and the quiet. It reminds me of being alone, but not lonely. I nodded, though I couldn't say anything that truly captured the way my chest tightened at her words. The pause stretched between us, comfortable and electric at the same time. When she reached over to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, our hands brushed again. Just a fleeting contact, but I felt it like it was meant to linger. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, steady and knowing, and then she looked away. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next week moved slower than usual. Every morning, I found reasons to pass by her apartment a little longer, to catch her leaving for work, to hear the quiet scrape of her keys against the doorframe. But the rhythm shifted. My friend started showing up earlier, dragging me into conversations, breaking the quiet. I lingered on the landing outside her door one morning, debating whether to knock, when I caught her looking out the window. Her gaze flitted past me, not quite meeting mine. She had that same soft sweater, the one that seemed to make her shimmer slightly in the sun. But something in her stance, the slight recoil when I cleared my throat, made my chest tighten. "Morning," I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning," she replied, voice careful, measured. She tucked a notebook under her arm, adjusting her bag as if to keep me at a distance. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let the warmth settle somewhere, anywhere. But I didn't. My fingers itched to brush against hers, but I stayed still, pretending to adjust the strap of my backpack. Later, at the cafe, I caught a glimpse of her through the glass, standing beside the counter, her profile sharp and quiet. She laughed at something the barista said, and I could almost convince myself that nothing had shifted. But then she glanced around, her eyes scanning, as though checking if anyone was watching. I imagined her at my table, just her and me, and the thought made my palms sweat. And yet, when she appeared, she chose the far corner instead. I kept stirring my coffee, stirring the tension, watching her through the rim of my cup. At one point, I offered to help her carry a stack of books she had in her hands. She hesitated, then nodded, letting me take one, then another. The small contact, brushing her fingers, feeling the light tremor in her hand, was enough to make my heartbeat lurch. She laughed softly when one book slipped from my grasp. "Careful," she said. And for a moment, her eyes lingered on mine a little too long, daring, testing. We sat in silence after that, our knees almost touching under the table. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled, caught in the space between us. I felt the pull, a quiet gravity drawing me closer, but she shifted slightly, as if sensing it too, but not letting herself fall. The moment stretched, long and taut. I imagined leaning in, tracing the line of her jaw with a hesitant fingertip. Imagined her lips just inches from mine. My throat tightened. She cleared her throat, glanced at the doorway, then looked back at her cup, leaving me suspended in the space between wanting and respecting. And then the bell over the door chimed. Someone entered. The spell broke. I sipped my coffee, hands trembling slightly, watching her fold her notebook and tuck it into her bag. She stood, straightened, and gave me a quick, polite smile. I didn't know if I'd misread her, or if the pause between us was a warning, a permission, or just the beginning. It was late afternoon when I found her on the park bench, the sunlight slanting through bare branches and dusting her hair with gold. She had her coat loosely wrapped, and she stared at the ground, twisting the strap of her bag between her fingers. I approached slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet that seemed to surround her. "Hey," I said, voice softer than usual. She looked up, and for a moment, I thought I saw something raw in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness, just exposure. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, waiting, I think, for me to decide whether to sit. I did. We sat side by side, knees almost brushing, neither of us speaking. The park was empty except for a few distant walkers and the whisper of wind against the trees. I could feel the tension winding tighter, and I wanted to say something. Anything. To break it, but the words didn't come. Finally, she exhaled. "I saw him today," she said quietly. I understood immediately. My friend, her son. My own guilt twitched. I nodded, looking down at my hands. "Yeah. He." She stopped, fingers fidgeting with the zipper of her bag. "He's always so involved, you know. I hate feeling like I'm hiding something." I swallowed. The confession wasn't loud, but it landed heavily between us. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to tell her it was okay, that I wasn't thinking about him the way she feared. But something held me back, the age gap, the boundaries, the fragile space we were sharing. I imagined what it would be like to let all this slip, to tell her what I'd felt since that first morning at the cafe. But the words tangled in my throat. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, gaze fixed on the ground again. "I don't even know why I'm saying this," she muttered. Her voice was low, almost ashamed. "I guess. I just can't keep pretending everything's normal." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her she wasn't pretending, that I'd noticed every pause, every small glance, every brush of our fingers. But instead, I said nothing. The silence stretched. Leaves skittered across the pavement. My throat felt dry. She looked up, eyes scanning mine, searching for something she couldn't name. I shouldn't. Her voice broke off. I leaned just slightly closer, just enough to feel the pull, the gravity between us. She shifted too, as if aware, but resisting, holding herself in check. And then she paused, looked at me, long and steady, and asked without words, "Do we dare?" The question hung there, unspoken but undeniable, suspended in the light and the quiet, and I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. The next week, she wasn't there. Not at the cafe, not on the fire escape, not on the park bench where the sunlight had caught her hair like gold. I waited, folding napkins in my own apartment, staring at half-sent texts, rehearsing lines I'd never sent. I passed by her building, slowing my pace at the steps, hoping to see a shadow through the curtains. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of an ordinary Thursday. When I finally got a message from her, it was brief, almost mechanical, busy. Can't meet today. No explanation, no hint of why. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Work, errands, life. But every instinct told me otherwise. I imagined her laughing with someone else, reaching across a table I wasn't at, folding her hands over someone else's touch. My chest tightened in the sort of ache you don't name aloud. I left my texts unsent, opened the drafts, and closed them again. Did I say too much? Not enough? And then I remembered something I hadn't known before. A small detail she'd let slip once, about a child, about a past she'd lived before I even existed in her world. I hadn't asked, hadn't pressed, but it mattered now. My mind ran loops of imagined scenes. Her mornings with him, her quiet routines, the invisible lines I wasn't supposed to cross. I tried to focus on school, on errands, on anything. I walked past the cafe twice, pretending to read the menu outside, catching only glimpses of her reflection in the glass. She was there, moving past tables, smiling politely at customers, but avoiding my gaze. The weeks blurred. Each time I imagined knocking on her door, leaning into that quiet space between us, I stopped myself. Something felt fragile, like the air would shatter if I said the wrong word. I replayed our last meeting over and over. The way her eyes had searched mine, the pause, the half-uttered words. "Do we dare?" I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Some nights, I imagined her opening the door, that faint smile, the quiet acknowledgement that we'd both been waiting. Other nights, I imagined her closing it, leaving me outside, the quiet echo of absence stretching endlessly. I kept her number, stared at it sometimes, thumb hovering over the screen. Call. Text. Wait. Nothing. One evening, I passed her building again. Lights flickered in her window. She moved across the room, paused, and then vanished from view. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just walked past, keeping my distance from the life she seemed to live without me, keeping my longing tucked quietly into the folds of my chest. The seat at the park bench remained empty. The cafe chair by the window stayed vacant. The words I wanted to say stayed unsaid, dangling in the pause between what could have been and what wouldn't be, at least for now. I found her in the kitchen of her apartment that evening. The light was low, spilling across the counters in rectangles, catching the steam from the kettle. She was drying a mug with a towel, and for a moment I just stood there, hesitating in the doorway. "Hey," I said, voice small. She didn't turn immediately. The silence stretched, and I felt the weight of everything unsaid between us. Weeks of longing, doubts, near confessions, half smiles that carried more than words ever could. Finally, she looked at me, eyes catching the last glint of sunlight. "You came," she said quietly. I nodded, swallowing. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed. I stepped closer, careful not to overstep. She set the mug down, hands lingering on the counter, her fingers brushing the edge. I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor in the way her shoulders moved. "I didn't know what else to do," I said. To not come felt worse than risking. The words tangled, and I left them there. We stood in silence, the quiet punctuated only by the kettle's faint whistle in the background. I noticed the small movements I'd memorized over the weeks, the way she twisted the towel in her hands, the way her foot tapped lightly against the floor. She finally broke the stillness. "You could leave. I wouldn't blame you." I shook my head. "I don't want to leave. Not yet." Her gaze softened, lingering on me in that quiet, careful way that made my chest ache. "And yet," she said, almost to herself, "everything here, it's complicated." I reached toward her hand, hesitating just above it. The steam from the kettle rose between us, warming the space, but not enough to hide the tension in the air. My fingers brushed hers lightly, a tentative, fleeting touch, but it said everything words couldn't. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand settle against mine for a heartbeat, the faintest weight of permission. "I don't know if we can," she murmured, voice barely audible, but I understood. She meant the risks, the boundaries, the quiet impossibility of it all. "I know," I whispered, "but I'm here anyway." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, just enough to break the tension without pretending it was easy. Her hand remained in mine for a moment longer. Then she stepped back slightly, giving me space but not taking away the connection. We didn't need grand declarations. We didn't need the world to understand. The choice was ours, quiet and small, made in the kitchen with the kettle steaming and the sunlight fading. She nodded toward the mug on the counter. "Okay," she said softly. I squeezed her hand, just once, and let it go. That was enough. The room held the pause after everything. A quiet acknowledgement, a small connection, and the understanding that this, whatever it was real, fragile, and ours. Weeks became months, and mornings settled into a new rhythm. I still walked past her building at 8:47 a.m., though now it wasn't with the nervous hesitation of anticipation, just a quiet expectation. She sometimes appeared on her balcony, watering the plants, hair catching the light in those strands of silver and honey I had memorized months ago. Our meetings were quiet, almost mundane. A shared cup of black coffee at the cafe, the subtle touch of our fingers when passing a tea mug in her kitchen, the occasional side-by-side pause on the park bench where the first tension had risen between us. We didn't talk about the past weeks in detail. We didn't need to. The silences carried the meaning, the small habits carried the intimacy. One Thursday morning, she laughed at something I said about my laundry turning pink from someone else's sock. The sound wasn't dramatic, but it warmed the corner of the cafe, and I realized I had been holding my breath for months, letting it go finally. She didn't try to erase the lines of her life, the routines, her child, the responsibilities that made her pause so often. I didn't ask her to, and I learned that the quiet presence she offered, the acknowledgement of me without demand, was enough. Sometimes, we walked together to the corner store, carrying groceries. My friend would wave from the sidewalk, unaware of the small tension we had once tiptoed around. We didn't announce anything. The world didn't need to know. The life we shared, ordinary, flawed, small, was ours. The park bench remained our touchstone. We never sat in the exact same spot as before. The memory of hesitation lingered. But now, when we sat, the weight between us felt lighter, earned. I'd bring the black coffee. She'd offer a biscuit. We'd sit for a while, quiet, the wind in the branches above, the occasional bird landing nearby, and just exist together. I noticed her gestures the way I always had. The tilt of her head, the shift of her hands, the way her eyes traced the steam rising from my cup. And sometimes, I caught her noticing me, not with longing or caution, but with a quiet, settled presence that mirrored my own. One evening, she placed her hand briefly over mine on the kitchen counter, the same spot we had almost confessed everything. "Okay," she said softly, echoing the word we had once shared in that first small resolution. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't fireworks. It was just enough. Enough to know that we had made it to the other side, weathered, aware, together. And when I caught her glance across the cafe weeks later, sitting in the corner with her notebook and her green sweater, I smiled. A small, private smile. A smile only she would recognize as mine. Some mornings, I still pause at 8:47 a.m., cup in hand, and watch sunlight hit her hair. And sometimes, that's all the story we need. A quiet acknowledgement of presence, of survival, of a love that didn't need to shout to be felt.